where we talk about the business and marketing side of plastic surgery. I'm your host, Catherine Maley, author of Your Aesthetic Practice, What Your Patients Are Saying, as well as consultant to plastic surgeons to get them more patients and more profits. Now, I have a really interesting guest today. Normally, I interview surgeons, but instead, we're going the legal route. So I have Alex Thiersch, JD. He's an attorney and member of the American Bar Association, the Illinois State Bar, as well as the Chicago Bar Association. Now, he began his career in employment law, and he started his own firm in 2007. Now, through many twists and turns, somehow Alex eventually went from a successful law career to being the founder and director of the American Med Spa Association, otherwise known as AMSpa. And by the way, it happens to be the only organization that provides legal, compliance, and business resources to medical spas and cosmetic practices. Now, Alex ended up on my radar because when the world was normal and we used to travel a lot, we shared the podium quite a bit at the medical conferences. And he's a real pleasure to listen to. For a lawyer, he's really funny. Not that lawyers aren't funny, but the ones that I know are typically pretty dry. So he's really entertaining, and he was really fun to listen to. So I invited Alex to be a guest on Beauty in the Biz because we always talk about the business and the marketing side of plastic surgery, but never the legal side. And frankly, there's a reason for that. I'm a marketer. I am on this planet to help plastic surgeons get more patients, and lawyers have a tendency to poo-poo all of my marketing ideas because they always find a hole in there somewhere, and that just pisses me off. So usually I don't deal with this side, but it's a really important, part of your growing a practice. So I invited Alex here, and Alex, I want to welcome you to Beauty in the Biz. And I want to ask you how the weather is, because I don't know if you know this, but I'm originally from Chicago, and I know Chicago in February can be tough, and that's why I live in California now. So how's it going?
Everything is going great. Thank you so much for having me. Now,
Sure.
Now the pressure's on for me to say something funny.
I know.
I'm not anticipating. The weather is fine. I mean, we're sitting under about 2 feet of snow, but It's finally warming up, so it's all going to start to melt, and that'll be bad because I have dogs, and I'll get all dirty. And you know how it goes.
I do.
But it's great. Things are great. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So it was a pretty big jump to go from a typical law firm, corporate law, to building your very own medical association, a med spa association. That's a really big deal. How did that jump happen?
Yeah, I wish I could say I had this huge grand scheme and I thought the whole thing up start to finish, but like many things, that's not what happened. I am an entrepreneur at heart, so I knew I always wanted to have my own business and be my own boss, and so I was at my law firm. Originally, I started it, the American Med Spa Association, to basically to market my law practice, and I started summarizing some of the issues that I found. I had represented a client. Got it introduced to the industry, and I saw right away that there was a lot of gray area and a lot of people doing things they shouldn't be doing, and there was a lot of kind of no man's land as far as what people could do and couldn't do. So I just started to summarize those laws and said, here's a resource for people. I happened to just hit on something that was very well needed at the exact right time, and it started to grow. So then I said, hey, maybe there's something here. And I dove into it, jumped in with 2 feet. And, now 3 years ago, really, I've kind of quit practicing law almost entirely. I still have my license and I still consult, but I'm part of a law firm that helps with that. And it's been a crazy journey, not where I thought I would be, that's for sure. Didn't think I'd be talking about Botox and breast implants for my career.
That is so true, though. I mean, that's the same way. Like, everyone says, how did you get into this? And I say, it's just by accident. I happen to love Botox and filler, and I happen to go to some of the most famous dermatologists on the planet, and they were terrible marketers. Terrible at customer service. Their staff didn't have a clue of a patient with a credit card versus an insurance card. Yeah. And I thought, oh my God, there's such a need here for how to educate somebody on the emotional side of medicine. I call it the fun side of medicine. It's a whole different world than the one that they were used to on the medical side. So same thing, you just see something in the industry and you say, or in the world, and you say, I think I could help there.
It's such a good point, because there's two things there. One is that doctors tend to be really bad business people. Lawyers do too. It's just kind of the way that it is. Because they're so focused on the medicine part, and they don't oftentimes understand and realize So that said, though, what you said I think is so important for business people is that you have to always have your eyes open. Half the time, the opportunity will come and it'll be sitting right in front of you, and most people won't even notice it. And so, kudos to you for doing that, because absolutely, I think it's a great. The fun part is building the business, right, and doing the marketing. It also can be the scary part, but it's fun.
And especially, like, it used to be a lot more fun when everybody wasn't a consultant like me. Now everybody's a consultant, and it got really competitive. And I loved it when, like, during the first recession I went through, that was great because when doctors are fat and happy, they don't need me. But when things go awry or sideways, then all of a sudden I'm very valuable, and I like that a lot. But right now things are really good for everybody, so so it's kind of quiet around here. But
and you've been, I have to say, you've been at it for some time. I mean, I remember the first time I saw you, I think it probably was maybe VCS or ASAPS or one of those, or ASPS back in like 2009 or something, or 10. So it's been, that's a long time. So you've definitely seen it, and I think that gives you definitely a unique and positive perspective on what's going on. So kudos to you.
Thanks. Well, that is my differentiator. I say I've been around for 21 years. I've been hanging around with plastic surgeons. I've been there with them through the recessions, the good times and the bad. It's the marriage I never had. So give me some of because I don't know much about the law part of this industry, just what are some of the common legal issues that come up, especially for plastic surgeons, or maybe for plastic surgeons who also have a med spa? I don't know. I mean, give me just a couple of them.
No, it comes in probably more with med spas than just with straight plastic surgery, because the med spa, and I hate that term because it's just there's not really any spa about it anymore. But because the med spa industry has grown so fast, and you can open up a non-surgical aesthetic medical center, and that's where a lot of the stickiness comes in. So really, when it becomes but with that said, a lot of plastic surgeons have medical spas, and they contract with medical spas as medical directors. But a couple of the sticky things that we deal with. One deal, and for plastic surgeons, this is doubly true when it comes to social media and marketing, and this is where things have changed so quickly and they've grown so fast that the social media and marketing aspect of whether it's getting consent from your patients, getting an agreement with your providers where you're making sure that you are clarifying how much of the posts that they're doing on their own personal websites or Instagrams belong to you. There's a whole lot of stickiness with that. There comes, we're seeing influencers, which are becoming a huge thing, and that becomes, what does the contract say? Do you have a contract? Does it mention advertising? That's the one thing that in plastic surgery I see a lot of. Obviously, you also have, you have partners coming on. If you're going to contract with a partner, you have young surgeons coming on. You've got succession planning if someone's getting older and wanting to potentially retire. And then with the med spas, there's a whole other suite that get really sticky. That really, that's where I focus on, and things like ownership and the medical director contracts and then also supervision, like who has to actually be present at the med spa when services are going on, what types of providers are actually performing the services, and what supervision requirements arise therein. It really gets sticky, kind of, and that's where most people, if they are going to get in trouble, that's where it happens, is with the med spas and supervision.
I have seen every scenario, I think, out there. The medical director who's never there, the medical director who pops in periodically, the one who rents an office or a space and visits to do injectables. I will say the ones that I have noticed that work the best, quite frankly, are the ones who are run more as a business. So the surgeon doesn't need to be there, but he's got his hand on the numbers. He knows what's going on, good management there, and also excellent staff, like killer nurses, who know what they're doing. They've built that practice. They have great relationships, and the doctor is the overseer and let the nurses develop those relationships. I will honestly tell you, as a plastic surgeon or a plastic surgery patient, lifetime patient, nobody gets all my disposable income. Everyone gets some of it. So When I want surgery, I go to a certain place. When I want a specific body part, I go to a very specific specialist. But when I want my regular stuff, because I'm I used to be super busy and traveling everywhere, and I didn't have time for downtime, and I needed to get in and out, and I needed to trust that my result was going to be good. When you find a good med spa in your neighborhood where they'll take you on Saturdays, they'll take you at night, they're pleasant, like, when the meeting is at 12, it's really at 12, not 12:20. There's a lot to be said for that. And I'm getting as good of a result with them, probably better because they inject all day, whereas a plastic surgeon probably might not. I'm just saying there was a reason they became popular, and I know a lot of surgeons were so angry about it, thinking, how dare they? But I think you opened it up for the world because you didn't want to work with these patients. You thought that they were more of like a bother to you. Well, once again, somebody saw that in the marketplace, and that's what the patient wants. So I give them some of my money, and it spreads around.
That's a great point. And the plastic surgeons and cosmetic derms, the plastic surgeons really, I think, were the ones who really launched this because they were delegating to RNs to do the injectables. And then so you have this kind of generation of injectors who are non-physicians, right? Or they're the other thing that's happened is you've had non-core physicians, so non-surgeons coming into the marketplace as well. But really, I think what you said was important was whenever I talk to whether it's one of our boot camps that we're doing or I'm just consulting with someone, it's if you're a surgeon, you can't run your med spa like your surgical practice. If you run it in the same way, you're going to fail because it's a very different business model. There's the things that you mentioned, like being on time, right? Managing a high amount of patient inflow and being able to time it the right way because you don't have surgery, you're having people come in and out. All those things, it becomes such a different business. And I have seen absolutely the physicians who are able to kind of step aside a little bit and let someone with business skills pick up the ball and run the business part. Those are the ones that are the most successful because you've got much lower margins. The cost of services that you're providing is lower than a surgery. So you're not accepting insurance most of the time. So you're operating as a retail center for most. I hate to use that word, but it's in some ways it's true. People are coming in, they're buying services from you, and they're leaving. And so you've got to have your act together, and you've got to be on point with all of your numbers. You've got to be on point with everything. Otherwise, you're going to get over your skis and you're going to spend and not make enough money to survive. We see that all the time.
Do you have any advice for doctors who are approached by nurses or nurses or injectors, and they say, "Oh, I've got a great deal for you. You be my director," and then it goes all haywire. It's like the agreements are real murky. Like, who's going to do? What are we doing? And do you find any, like, when I'm sure surgeons ask you this all the time, what's a good scenario for them to actually partner with nurses, and when isn't it?
So it's tough, and you mentioned non-core physicians kind of, but in some ways that's true because sometimes they'll come in and have the same question.
You're right.
It's the problem that you're going to run into deals. Well, there's really two. One is with ownership. So every state has various ownership laws as far as who can actually own the medical practice, and some states don't even allow nurses to own it. So you've got to be careful with how they're set up, and most of the time they have no idea if they're owning it correctly or incorrectly. That's a lesser thing, but the bigger issue, it comes with you really want to make sure that you're partnering with someone that you're comfortable with, that you get along with, that has a head on their shoulders, that is experienced, that has enough training, and you as the doctor are responsible for ensuring that person is in fact trained. I think one of the things that gets a little murky as the med spa industry has grown up is that you'll have an RN come and say, "Hey, I've got this huge clientele. I want you to be my medical director. You don't have to do anything. I've got this. I'll just give you a check every month, and you collect, and you can make your car payment or whatever." That's dangerous because the minute, if it's an RN, right? If it's an RN, those patients don't belong to the RN necessarily. They belong to the doctor. The doctor is the one who establishes the physician-patient relationship. The doctor is the one who has to diagnose, create the treatment plan, do the prescriptions, things like that. And so you can't just be an absentee landlord. You can't not show up. You have to be involved, and that goes from ensuring that the people who are providing the services are qualified to do so. It's probably the most important thing, because if you have someone who's not qualified and they injure somebody with an injection, I promise you, the argument, well, I didn't know that they were not qualified, is not going to work before the medical board. They're going to hate that. They expect you as the physician to understand what is going on at your facility. And even if it's a medical director contract, if it's just a nurse that you're working with, those patients are yours. So you've got to be cautious of who you partner with. The other big thing that a lot of folks get in trouble, and I say a lot of people get in trouble, the enforcement is very limited in this industry, unfortunately. But we do see folks. I just talked to someone today who is getting investigated. Is what we call the good faith exam, which they call that in California. But an RN is, and I'm talking about RNs, not nurse practitioners or PAs, but RNs are there to perform treatments at the delegation of a doctor. So really, one of the things that we see that is the most troubling to us is when new patients come in, they see an RN, that RN treats the patient leaves, and the doctor or PA or NP has never seen the patient. They've had no interaction with the patient whatsoever. Because what that is you've got the RN practicing medicine now. Because you skipped that step of creating the physician-patient relationship, creating the diagnosis and the treatment plan that has to come from the physician. And if you get caught doing that, that's where the real problem comes in. So, I mean, I always tell doctors to proceed with caution. If someone's coming in telling you it's too good to be true, you're just going to get a check, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. You got to do your homework, do your due diligence, and make sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed.
And I would just throw in, if you're going to work with somebody like the nurse, although here in San Francisco or in California, I believe you have to be an NP now, but you better make sure you know where they're at in their marketing. Like, do they know how to attract patients to the spa? Because they don't just come by accident. I've seen too many doctors who have wasted days. They spend a day there, and it's an hour away. They spend a day and they have nobody, or one or two, patients to do Botox on. What a waste of their time and resources. So I think that's a really big component. How are you going to grow this thing, or have you already grown it? That's the only group I would hang around with. The one who has a huge database, great reputation, great credibility, real popular on social media, used to do a lot of events. That's who I would partner with.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing you have to be careful of, or at least cautious of in that situation is, what happens when there's a disagreement, right? Or if you say, I don't like the way that particular marketing piece went out because legally whatever, right? Or whatever it is. Like what we're seeing now is a lot of these relationships between the surgeons and the RNs are maturing enough where the RNs are moving on or the surgeons are moving on because and so you separate. That becomes sticky because we've seen RNs leave a surgical practice and go open their own med spa and take 25% of the injectable patients or more with them, and that can hurt, especially if they go right across the street. So you've got to. That's another area where you've got to just be careful with who you partner with. Make sure your documentation is buttoned up. Make sure everyone's expectations are laid out clearly at the beginning, so you know exactly who's going to do what and how it's going to work. Think about what's going to happen if you break up. I mean, I always consider it's like a marriage. What's going to happen if you get divorced? Who's going to get what? How are you going to split that up? Because if you don't think about that at the beginning, when you're happy and everyone's getting along, it's going to be really difficult when you're not getting along. And interestingly, most of the time I see problems when people are doing successfully as opposed to when they're doing poorly, because money does crazy things to people.
Yes.
So
I've gotten a couple of calls where the internal nurse in the plastic surgeon's med spa, he has his plastic surgery side and then the med spa side. The nurse loves social media. She built up a huge following. He wasn't watching, and it turns out all of the branding was hers and not the practices. And that was, first of all, that was a yellow flag. She was getting ready to fly anyway, but or maybe not getting ready to, but once she saw like that she can pull it off on social, she thought, okay, I can open up my own place. Of course, how hard can this be? But I'd be careful with that. I would have it built in to the agreement. When you work for me, all branding is ours. Our watermarks are our logos. It's all us. Yeah, it's all the surgeons.
That's essential in any of these contracts, as well as if you leave, we get it, right? So it becomes our property and you can't use it. So even if they have their own Instagram, like if they're using before and after pictures, or if they're talking about your brand, like that all belongs to you, not to them. I've seen that too, and it can get really hairy really fast. And we've seen some really caustic and bad arguments amongst surgeons and nurses with that exact situation.
So let's talk about the unhappy patient, because God knows there are a few, and I've done a lot of talks on this. And nobody wants to talk about prevention, but it would have been helpful, had you looked at your patient experience to make sure that person was happy all the way through. We human beings have a lot of signals that we overtly show that when we're not happy. I know you can tell personally with me, you'll know when I'm not happy. It's written all over me. So I would try to nip that before it accelerates to anything bigger and worse. But when it comes to unhappy patients, do you have any pearls of how to keep it on the down low before it accelerates?
Yeah, it's tough, and it's one of the toughest things that I think that surgeons deal with and attorneys deal with too, because a lot of the calls that we get are because someone left me a bad review and I want to go after them. This was crazy, right? And there's not an easy answer. I'm sure there's not an easy answer to that question. The first thing I always say is, and this is damn near impossible all the time, but don't treat the crazy patient, right? There are a lot of crazy patients. And it's easy to say that, but I think it's important, like you were saying, to teach physicians and their intake staff what are the red flags, so you can keep those folks out of your practice, because it's really, really difficult when they come in. Once they're in the door and you're treating them, especially after a surgery, now you've got things like you have to follow certain ethical rules when you're discharging them, and it becomes difficult. So that's the first thing. The other thing that and these are not legal mechanisms, so this is just kind of experience. Just the experience that they get, like you mentioned at the top of this question, just check your patient experience. If you're just nice and your team is nice and you do things like respond to phone calls and questions, you follow up as needed. If there's any type of a adverse reaction or a question and they call, you're responding in a timely fashion, and you're nice and you're courteous and you're professional. 9 times out of 10, and really it's that high, it's over 90% of the time, lawsuits and problems are mitigated if you just are nice and forthcoming with the patients. You just provide the information that they want. It's when you get defensive and or they're unhappy with the way they were treated by the front desk or whatever it was that they start to really kind of get after you. Now, of course, those are just precautionary tales. So it really depends on what they're threatening to do. Not what we typically say for patients who are unhappy is, number one, I'm never afraid to recommend giving a refund if a refund is needed.
I agree. I would say get rid of this as soon as you can. Yes. Don't go into that defense mode where, no, I'm going to fight this. They're wrong. That's 2 years of grief, sleepless nights. I just think just get rid of it.
Give them a refund and have a refund agreement. And that refund agreement, since it's a contract, you can say, you agree that this is a full, settlement of any disputes, and you're not going to talk bad about it. You can actually prevent them from disparaging you in that agreement, which is huge because that's part of what you're doing. But you're absolutely right. It's not. This is a time to keep your ego to the side. Everybody's going to get bad reviews. Everybody's going to have unhappy patients, right? I mean, it's impossible to avoid. So the sooner you can get through it and manage it, get beyond it, and start getting the positive reviews to dilute it, The worst thing I think you can do, and this is counterintuitive, I think, for a lot of physicians, a lot of people in general, is to fight it. Because especially if it's online, because if you're fighting it, you're just drawing attention to it. You're making yourself look bad, and there's always the potential that you're going to violate HIPAA or patient privacy by getting into it online. So really, my goal is always you want to mitigate, you want to de-escalate, you want to get to a point where you can go your separate way, give them a referral so they can go somewhere else. And if they've left a bad review, ask them to take it down. And if they won't, then you just move on and start getting positive reviews to dilute it down. That's my feeling.
A couple of times I've heard the surgeons say they had happy patients and they were using their photos out in the world, and now they're unhappy, and now they say, that's it, take my photos off. But the problem is now it's out in the universe. So does that come up very often for you? And if so, how do you handle that?
It does, not as much as maybe you'd think, but it definitely does, and that's very easily solvable by the language you put in your photo consents. So and what you need to do is literally put that in there. Like, you are consenting to me posting this on my website or my social media. Once it is up there, it's out there, right? And the patient always has the right to revoke consent. And if they do, all your responsibility is to take it down from your website. But you need to be very, very clear in the consent that doesn't mean it's not already out there in the world, because it is. And so that's tough. That's tough. But your obligation is, if they remove their consent, you take their before and after picture down. Absolutely, that's all you need to do. And you just need to maybe scrub the metadata to make sure their names don't pop up when you search them. But besides that, there's nothing else you can do. And if you have that down in writing in the original consent, that helps.
Okay, let's switch gears and talk about like group purchasing groups. What do you call them? Group purchasing organizations or something. Those I'm watching pop up more. Some of the surgeons actually start their own, or some of the business people in our industry have started theirs. And I got to tell you, I've heard about them for years, but I never get a straight answer. Some of these guys have invested heavily in these partnerships or whatever the heck they're called, and I know for a fact they didn't get their money back, like not close. So I just haven't heard any good stories yet about them. In your experience, what are these groups about, and is it a good thing, bad thing?
Well, it's interesting because I just had a long conversation with an attorney about this the other day, because we have a lot of folks at AMSpa in our membership who are clamoring for us to form a group purchasing organization, because like the cost of Botox from Allergan, they want to get a lower, they want to get the platinum level, and they don't. Most healthcare verticals, industry segments have GPOs in some fashion. For whatever reason, it has been resisted in aesthetics. And so I don't know of any that have really made it. What we do see is exactly what you just described, is these kind of smaller GPOs that are forming, which are not necessarily illegal, but you've got to be careful, because there's all sorts of distribution laws and pharmacy distribution laws that you have to watch out for. I've not seen any that really work, but it is possible, and so it depends on how you do it, right? I mean, there's one side that I've seen where if you develop a large enough set of like pieces of your organization, so if you have 100 locations, you can buy for 100 locations, right? That's perfectly allowed, and you're going to get a better deal. The issue becomes if you don't necessarily have 100 locations, but you work with others, and together we have 100 locations that are in different states. Now we're buying at bulk rates, and then I'm distributing to you. That is potentially problematic. It's interesting. Surgeons especially are very, very anxious to get the best deal, and what I have found, I always tell folks, just like that's a cost of doing business. You're going to have to pay the rate until you grow to a point where you can afford a group discount. it makes me nervous. I would be very, very cautious. Just like you shouldn't buy Botox from or drugs from Canada or overseas. Or like you've got to stick within the parameters that exist. Now, with that said, I am looking into GPOs because I'm as curious about it as anybody, and I want to see kind of how this would work and could it work, and it hasn't yet, not that I've seen.
So you would take the association members that you have, group them, and go to Allergan and say, here's my buying group, give us a good price on Botox. But then I can already hear Allergan with all of its legalese. They'd say, well, how do we know who you're distributing it to? For all I know, you're giving it to the estheticians, or, that's a big project.
And there is a right way to do it, right? So there are very large GPOs that exist, and typically when that happens, you've got that figured out through contracts. So Allergan would then be distributing directly to the doctors that are part of your group, and I wouldn't be taking possession of it.
Gotcha.
But you're absolutely right. Like now you have to figure out, okay, who's actually getting it, who's using it, and if an esthetician is using it and injecting somebody, and they're part of my GPO and they injure somebody, am I now on the hook for potential liability? And that's where I get nervous with the physicians that I've seen do it. They're the ones who are kind of distributing it out. It's not going from Allergan to their different spokes of the wheel. It's going to them, at least theoretically, and then they're distributing it. And I don't know. That I would want to know exactly who's getting everything that I'm distributing and what they're using it for, and make sure that they're compliant. Otherwise, it would make me very nervous. By the way, I don't know if you can hear my dog barking in the background.
Does he want to come in and join us?
No, she is upstairs and is not actually put her away for this very reason.
Well,
so make it quiet.
I am a huge dog lover, so I don't mind it at all. And I can't believe my dog hasn't shown up yet. But but at least she has a cute little bark.
Yeah.
Can you give us the common mistakes made that could have been avoided? There have to be 2 or 3 of them that you see over and over.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's see what's the one that I really think of the most, because the one that's kind of jumping to my mind, that especially deals with surgeons, is I'm always amazed at how many times surgeons will enter into partnerships or agreements, whether it's with each other, whether it's with associate physicians, or oftentimes it's like new business ventures, right? Mm-hmm. A vendor will come in and say, I've got this great product, I want you to do this, and you're going to get a cut of it, and they never get anything in writing or legally documented. Oh. And it ends up being it ends up going south, and it just becomes a big mess because they've never taken the time to actually document. For whatever reason, surgeons especially tend to have an aversion to lawyers, and I understand why that is. But they also don't use lawyers. They tend to say, even when they're starting their own practices and they're doing their own compliance documents, their own operating agreements and company agreements, they'll go to their buddy who's a real estate attorney because they can get a deal on it, or they'll go to LegalZoom and they won't want to spend the time to actually get it done right. And that is the thing that's most maddening to us, because honestly, 9 times out of 10, we are fixing things that have been screwed up in the beginning. And we have a rule called the 5 and 50 rule. It's really 5,000 and 50,000. But it's $5 to do it right the first time, 50 to fix it after you do it wrong when there's a problem. And I'm telling you, it's a coin flip when someone comes in the door, whether or not that's going to be the issue. And then even if they have had an attorney before, oftentimes it's an attorney who doesn't know the nuances of aesthetics. They don't know, some of the ins and outs of the different state laws relating to aesthetics. And so it's just take the time to actually use a knowledgeable attorney on your business deals. Mm-hmm. If you're a business person and you're venturing out into other areas, and and the money you can make is substantial. You want to protect it, make sure that everything is done in advance. I mean, that's the one thing that jumps out. I mean, there's a lot of them, to be honest.
Yeah. Talking about agreements, a lot in today's world, because it is retail medicine, and it's much more about patient attraction and conversion and profitability and scaling, and it's a business. And in business, we often encourage staff by using commissions or bonuses or whatever you want to call them. And I know it's a big deal here. In the world I grew up in, I was in Chicago. I was in sales forever, and I was doing door to door like forever. It was, and I was paid. I've only been paid on commission my entire life. I never got paid unless I did something. So I'm from that mentality in that world. But in this world, it's illegal kind of thing. When is it fee splitting, and when is it fee splitting? When is it motivating staff to go the extra mile?
It's a tough area.
Yeah.
And it's counterintuitive too, because we really are. You want to incentivize people, because this isn't like, going to the doctor because your throat hurts and you need an antibiotic to make that go away. You're competing for the same dollar, and people are these tactics, and I call them tactics, but marketing, sales, conversion, all those things that you're talking about have to be done if you're going to be successful. So it's interesting. In most states have fee splitting provisions on some level, and what really those are often geared towards is they don't want you paying for patients. So it's almost like it's a version of the anti-kickback laws where they don't want me giving you $50 to refer your friends, right? So every time you refer a friend to me, I give you $50. That's a classic definition of an anti-kickback and fee splitting, and that's where it all comes from. So whenever you look at it that way, it's, are you incentivizing somebody to come treat with you? But you can incentivize your providers in the work that they do. So if they are part of the marketing effort, and the entire revenue of the injectables department, for lack of a better word, goes up, everybody can be compensated as a result of it going up based upon a particular schedule. What it can't be, though, is it can't be drawn directly to the cost of services. So the problem that we see, and everybody does this anyway, so I say it's mostly illegal, but everyone does it anyway. And we see some people get in trouble, but most of the time not, to be honest. How people usually do it is they'll say, okay, Susie the RN is going to get 10% of all revenue that comes in from Botox that she does.
Right.
Now, I can tell you in most states, if you got caught doing that, that is illegal, because you are literally paying. There's two things. One, you're paying her to go out and get patients, and then you're also splitting medical revenue with her. And medical revenue typically has to go to the doctor in most states, not always, but in most states. So how you want to do it is you want to incentivize them based upon what they're doing in their job. So it's really like, what I like to do is our bonus structures. If your practice or your department hits certain benchmarks, they get a predetermined set amount of money. Gotcha. So it's $10,000 or $20,000 or whatever it is. Now, anyone who's looking at that knows that it's smoke and mirrors for the most part, because it's really the same thing. You're just structuring it a little bit differently. You're calling it bonuses and incentive-based pay as opposed to commission. But you can reach the same thing without paying commissions.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I know then if you can't do that, then you need to find staff who just like to work and grow your practice for you, who don't need incentives to do that. I find that much more difficult to find those kind of people in today's world. So it's an issue that needs to be figured out, because too many of the surgeons say to me, I just give them a holiday bonus and be done with it. And that's not an incentive plan. That's that's where you get the patient showing up on December 15th saying, what am I getting this year so I can go Christmas shopping? That defeats the whole purpose of any of that. So
you can do it, Catherine. Doing an incentive plan is not difficult. I mean, you can do it and have it be compliant and legal, because most of the medical boards that are investigating these things they're not interested necessarily in that aspect. They don't want, if you've got an incentive structure and your employees are busting their butts and they're helping bring in business and you're giving them bonuses based upon that, and they know what it is, that's not typically an issue. It's when you're overtly doing things that are clearly violating anti-kickback laws, and you're incentivizing patients to come in. you're paying your nurses, $100 for every patient that they bring in the door. And it's clearly like, as long as you're doing it in a careful way, you can do it. So I get frustrated a little bit. 'Cause I'm like, you can make this so you can cover yourself and you'll have no issue. You're not going to get in trouble. You just got to take a couple steps and get it done.
I have called a couple boards, and it was all, I never did get a really straight answer, but from what I understood, it was the tit for tat. I will do this when you do that. And it was that clear line to, this is how you're going to get paid, and you're not supposed to entice somebody to have a medical procedure. So
yeah, and there's another side to it. There's the side with your team that's doing the actual work for you that you're incentivizing. What we've also seen a lot of is compensating influencers, compensating like the yoga studio or the Pilates studio, where you're giving them a $50 gift card every time they send someone to your office.
Yeah.
That is also potentially a kickback, because again, you're paying someone to give you a referral, which is kind of the classic definition of what a kickback is. So with influencers, which is kind of a new frontier for all this, we see people to say, hey, I'll give you $10 or $50 or $100 every time you send me a patient. That's fine in your business. It's fine in events business that I do. But if you're a doctor, that's oftentimes not okay. And so it's just like we're getting into these areas that most areas of healthcare don't deal with this either, because there's not a lot of sales in like orthopedics from the treatment side. There's sales from the manufacturer side, but you're not getting your nurse to sell somebody to come to you to get their knee replaced, right? It's just kind of, you go where the insurance covers you and we get recommended.
Can a plastic surgeon give away a free breast dog to an influencer?
That's a really interesting question, and I don't know the answer. I think it really depends on the state that you're in, and I think you've got to have it really, really carefully documented, because there's definitely, I know for a fact, there will be medical boards that would raise their eyebrows at that and say, we had one, it's not even that overt sometimes, like we had one matter where a doctor was giving away free Botox with breast dogs. So they would do breast dogs, and as an inducement, so the medical board says, they would give away complimentary Botox after the fact. So instead of saying we're going to do a package, boobs and Botox, right? That's all you got to do. Then you get both. They were saying, come and get a breast dog and you get free Botox. And the medical board, I think this was in Texas, but I'm not 100% sure, said that is a kickback, because you are inducing somebody with something of value to become a patient of yours. So influencers, giving them a complimentary breast dog, you can give away treatments and you can set your own prices. So like there's the one side of the thing where you can provide an influencer a service just because you want to, but are they then going to go out and give you positive reviews? Because technically, if you can't buy positive reviews either. They've got to be honest, otherwise it becomes a kickback.
Right.
So it gets tricky. It's not that you can't do it. You can. I always say, like in those situations, come up with an even value. Like, what does the breast dog cost? He or she's going to provide you those types of services that equal that value. And if you make it a value-based contract where you're getting services in exchange for a service, that's perfectly legal. You can do that all day. But oftentimes, you know how it's going to happen. It's going to be an influencer comes in. There's no agreement at all.
Oh, no.
They just have to give you a breast dog, and they're going to go out and send people to them. And then when the medical board finds out, they're going to be like, well, how is this arrangement? And it's going to be just messy. And that's where you leave yourself open. you can probably get out of it, but what if you can't because there's no documentation? The medical board and lawyers have a saying: if it's not in writing, it didn't happen, right? So if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. So if you're going to be doing these things, you've got to get it in writing so that you can back it up when the medical board or a lawsuit comes calling.
Because I think some of the surgeons think as long as I don't have it in writing, it can't get ugly, because I didn't write anything down, like I didn't say anything, and
that's a worse idea. That's a worse idea. Because just imagine especially in today's day and age with all the politics and things that are said.
Yeah.
If someone says something out in the world and they go and report, and the medical boards are not very well organized, and they're oftentimes not very efficient. So anybody can file a complaint about anything, and it can be anonymous. So most medical boards will allow you, like in the state of California, anybody can call and say, this doctor did so-and-so, and I'm anonymous, and just like hang up.
Wow.
And then the medical board is going to have to investigate because they're going to have this information and they have to do something. And in fact, most of the time that's what happens. It's an anonymous complaint. So if it's not in writing and you don't have the parameters worked out, how are you going to prove your case? How are you going to prove that this was a fair value exchange for this influencer, that they signed all the consents, that whatever it is, right? I agree. That kind of goes back to my surgeons don't like lawyers, and we need to kind of bridge that gap and get them to use each other.
Mm-hmm. But as a consumer, I can go to the medical board and see if they have any actions against them. Would they also show me something that said, well, we did get 3 calls that were anonymous? Do they show that? Good.
No, not
yeah, because I wouldn't want the consumers to know that, because some of the consumers are batty,
No. So that goes back to the Yelp and all the review sites, because that's where the consumers can get on you. Normally, nothing is going to be on your record on the medical board site unless there's a formal action against you. So there has to be a complaint filed by the medical board against your license. And even then, if it's just a complaint, it might not come up. There has to be some adjudication of that, like a guilty finding or a settlement. Most of the time, just a complaint's not coming. The problem with the complaints, though, is that you won't know where they came from. They'll say, back in July of 2018, patient X went to your med spa and said XYZ, and you're like, how am I supposed to figure out what's happening? Because there's no information on it. And then what we're seeing more and more of, particularly in California, I don't mean to scare your California viewers, but we're seeing this more and more, is that we're getting these complaints, and they are starting, medical boards are starting to do more and more of the undercover investigations, where they send somebody in. Typically, they're sending somebody in to try to get an RN to do something beyond their scope, whether it's do an injection without a good faith exam, write a prescription. Something is wrong, and then they go after and they get everybody. And we're seeing that's kind of a trend that I think is going to continue to go up, and that's scary because you don't know, who's coming in. But that's why it's always good to have everything buttoned up from the beginning, because then if somebody does come in, you're doing it right anyway.
For sure. Last question: what is the craziest legal situation you have seen since you've been hanging around with the surgeons?
Oh boy. Oh, sorry about that. I would have to, I should have given that more thought, Catherine, because I knew that was coming, and I forgot. I would have to say that it's.
How about the doctors dating the staff?
Well, we definitely see that. What I was going to say is something similar to that. So it's, but that's a big issue.
Yeah, I've seen that myself quite a bit, and I think, are you out of your mind? That is just rife for issues.
Like dating patients is even worse.
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah.
But I think the craziest thing that I think about it was, and it involves exes, right? So whenever you date your staff, number one, there's sexual harassment laws that come into place and discrimination laws that are immediately invoked whenever you're dating somebody who works for you, because there's a power dynamic that can be raised. So I would strongly suggest you don't do it. However, most of the time when we see really vicious complaints coming against a surgeon or a med spa owner or a physician, it's from someone they have dated in the past. And so we had one where the medical board continued to get complaints against this particular med spa for things like unsanitary conditions, garbage being left all over the place, rats, in the facility. And it turned out it was from this person's ex-husband, who was just pissed off. Get it cleared up. We handled it, said, look, this is fake. They go to a different location. they go to a different state, and what happens? Lo and behold, within months, another complaint starts happening, and it happens over and over and over again. So you've got to be careful with that. Like I just say, just don't date anybody, don't get married, just be a hermit, a nun, a priest, whatever it is, because but if you are going to date, just try to make it outside of your workforce and certainly not your patients.
Can you actually write up an agreement? Like write it up while you're still in love. Just like here's what's going to happen if we stay together. Here's what's going to happen if we break up.
I mean, I guess it would
That'd be
help,
odd, huh?
but I mean,
Yeah, too much.
it's tough because the issue is not when you're in love; it's when you're not in love,
Yes.
and when the problem happens. Because then the person who's spited now has, number one, they're spited, so
Yeah.
oftentimes they're angry. Those types of feelings come in. I mean, there's just nothing worse than being involved. It's really, look, it happens, right? I met my wife at work.
Oh.
So like years ago, it happens. You're around people. You've just got to be really, really careful. Really careful.
Pick well. Yeah.
Exactly right.
All right.
Pick well, get it in writing.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Alex, for being on Beauty and the Biz. I really appreciate it. And if somebody wants to get a hold of you to ask you their own personal questions, how would they do that?
Yeah, well, shoot me an email. So AmericanMedSpa.org is our website, AmericanMedSpa.org. My email is alex@AmericanMedSpa.org. Shoot me an email. Come to our website. I'm easy to find. Just type me into Google. I'll come up and just absolutely. We're here to help. That's what our whole organization is here to do, is to provide as much information as we can to the public. And then if you need additional information, we've got it. We've got all sorts of forms and resources, and we've got a full law firm that backs us, so we've got all the tools. So I appreciate you having me, and
Sure.
and congrats to your success. And the industry is going well. Nobody should be afraid of lawyers. Just you got to use them in the right way.
Yeah. Well, I hope to share the podium with you again someday if we ever
Absolutely.
get back out there. So
We will.
All right.
Sure we will.
All right,
Sometime
thanks.
in the next 18 months.
I sure hope so. I'm really ready to get back out there again.
Absolutely.
Okay. And
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Sure, no problem. And that wraps it up for this episode of Beauty and the Biz. If you would be so kind as to subscribe to Beauty and the Biz, I'd really appreciate it, as well as leave us a nice review. That would be terrific. If you've got any questions or feedback, just leave them at my website, CatherineMaley.com. And of course, if you want to talk to me on Instagram, I'm at Catherine Maley MBA. Thanks so much, and we'll talk again soon.